and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. I'm going to be getting into some prepper-related information here. 15 reasons to prep even if doomsday never arrives. I got a few articles covering ISIS and few articles covering the economy. Something, though, that I do want to start off with is been talking about vaccines and the push to force people to vaccinate. And there's a lot of things that the mainstream is purposely leaving out to go along with this, what I would consider a fraud and nothing but a PR stunt. And I think we've seen it enough with, the H1N1 and every other thing that pops up that they immediately burst out. But first, I'm going to play a clip here from Ron Paul Liberty Report, February 7th. Him and Daniel McAdams sit down and they start off with talking about the vaccines, and they do cover a little bit of what's going on in Ukraine. So I'll let that play too. But definitely pay attention to the beginning of this with talking about the vaccines and some of the history with vaccines and the misconception that people might get by watching mainstream media that tells you everything is fine, that you should go get vaccinated, and people that don't are bad people. So I'm going to go ahead and cue this up here.
Everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Today I have with me Daniel McAdams, who is the Executive Director for the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Daniel, welcome to our program.
Thank you, sir. It's great to be here.
Well, good. There's a couple things we want to talk about today that's been in the news, and we want to give a little different perspective than most people get on evening news and evening TV. The first is this issue of vaccinations. I mean, it's incessant, on the TV. And if anybody in public arena says that they are somewhat questioning, the use of vaccines, they are practically stereotyped as being totally insane, which I happen to disagree with. Have you been following this issue at all on what's been happening here?
I have, and as a matter of fact, what I noticed on the social media is there is almost an aggression toward people who make a choice not to vaccinate themselves or children. It's almost a mob mentality that's come up.
Yeah, and one thing I don't think I've heard yet, which I think is the most important issue, obviously, and that is the freedom issue. Whose responsibility is it? Whether it's education, medical care, or who gets vaccines, it's always assumed government knows best. And it has to be the same way for everybody. And the government makes an announcement, and everybody has to obey. Yet, if you understood the freedom principle, which a growing number of Americans are now starting to understand, that we realize or should make the point that parents are responsibility, or we ourselves as individuals are responsibility for our own bodies, that we own our bodies and not the government.
Sure. The message almost has to get across, similar to the marijuana message, that you may not endorse the use of it. However, you endorse the right of a person to use their body as they wish.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But, I've dealt with this issue for a while. I was first elected to Congress in a special election in 1976, and that's when Gerald Ford was president. And one of his first crises he had to deal with as president was the swine flu. It was going to be an epidemic. Thousands of Americans were going to die. So he gets out and shows he's getting a shot, and they want an appropriation to give everybody a shot in the United States and be vaccinated against this horrible, horrible disease that's coming. And the vote came up. Larry McDonald, another physician, a Democrat from Georgia, he and I voted against it. So I think we were the only two doctors in the Congress. So it just turned out that we thought, well, it's not their business, and who knows what's going to happen. And you know what happened on that. That turned out to be a big farce. There was a breakout in Fort Dix in New Jersey, and it never spread anyplace. And yet everybody, they got this appropriation, they got this shot. And can you believe it? There were drug companies behind the motivation to sell vaccine. but the results were pretty clear cut. There were 500 people who ended up getting Guillain-Barré syndrome from this, which is very, very serious. This is a disease that can come naturally, and it can be viral, but it's a result of this virus that they get when they get the shot. You become paralyzed. You could be paralyzed your whole body. Fortunately, most people get over it, but it's unnecessary if you're getting a swine flu shot that there was no need for. But there were 25 people who died from the shot. Nobody died from the swine flu, and there were these 500 cases. And yet they still say that parents have no responsibility. Listen to the government. And, more and more information is coming out now about government making these mandates on medical care, whether it's taking medication for clogged arteries in the heart and nutritional products and all. That is the principle that I think is so wrong. And of course, it's rotten that anybody who takes a different position on this is also practically un-American, and they're insane. But this measles business that's going on, I don't know whether you ever had measles. You probably had the shots or something.
No, but we had chicken pox and all that stuff, and we loved getting off school.
No, I had them all the diseases, and we who grew up with it, most of the parents were pleased when you had them and you got over with them. It's not harmless. Because if you're have bad nutrition or live in bad conditions and get pneumonia, it can be rather serious. But ordinarily, people got over this rather easily. But even now, I don't even think it's up to 200 people in this country that's had it. So
it seems like maybe the media is trying to scare us.
No. Well, if you look at it, I'll bet you can find the money behind it. They're going to sell vaccines and that sort of thing. A recent case came up. I think there were 5 or 6 kids in a nursery all got it, but they were less than 1, and they don't give the shot until they're 1 anyway. So it had nothing to do with them not having their shots. But I worry as a physician and as trying to use common sense of these small babies getting huge inoculations with many, many doses put together and close together because they say, well, they do okay and they didn't get this disease. But I think that's a stress to the immune system, and who knows what happens, later on. And I think that's one of the things that they don't count. But it to me is just part of this fear mongering. Well, we just had it, what, a year, not even a year ago on Ebola?
Yeah, just a few months ago, actually.
Yeah,
we were all supposed to get quarantined and vaccinated.
And there was immediate proposal to the Congress, boost up the appropriations. We need more research. And the companies that work on this, actually working for some of these vaccines, were getting $50 million a year, but they were talking about $6 or $7 billion additional into these funds in order to work on a vaccine. Well, it turned out that was a fizzle too. And I'm glad sometimes this stuff gets better faster. And I guess you saw this article where the number of people either in Africa?
It was in Africa. It was actually a World Health Organization report that in the worst affected countries in Africa, the infection rate is down more than 90% this past week, as of this past week.
Nature might be taking care of that. But there was another time when vaccines came up, and that had to do with the Persian Gulf War, a war that I strenuously opposed. But a vaccine was involved there, and it had to do with, I think it was cholera or one of the diseases. They were immunizing them, and so many people ended up with Persian Gulf War syndrome.
What's the libertarian solution to this issue?
Well, you can do this by freedom of choice. Individuals should make the decision, but it becomes very complex when you have public schools, public care for medical care, because they'll say, well, we don't want to take a risk. It's sort of like, you wear a helmet because if you go to the emergency room, we have to take care of you. So if there's a risk in there, so they own everything and they control everything, and nobody makes a decision. But in a free society, the individual would. If you're a homeschooler or if you have a private school would have every right in the world to say, if you're not immunized against polio or whatever, you can't come to our school. And that would be handled that way. But this whole idea that they can deal with civil liberties in a state institution, it's absolutely impossible to do that. But it's this rejection of property and volunteerism and coming up with solution. Who owns our bodies and who has responsibility for children. And actually, I think the parents, in spite of shortcomings of some, I think it's much better than the responsibility being given to the government. Besides, if you have an irresponsible government, and we tend in that direction at times, the devastation from their bad choices is so much worse than allowing individuals to make these decisions. So I think it's something that is very much a creature of authoritarianism, where they have to have an authoritarian answer to everything. Everybody must do this. So where my vote is. My vote's for a freedom answer and a family and personal responsibility.
Sounds good.
The other subject I wanted to visit with you a little bit, and you've done a lot of work on it, and it has to do with foreign policy and the mess that I see us digging ourselves into, and that is what's going on in Ukraine. I have the impression that not too long ago, all of a sudden there was a declaration, there is an emergency. We have to stop Putin. Did you get the impression that all of a sudden this seemed to pop out of nowhere, and now it's ongoing and threatening to get much worse?
Sure, and actually, it's been an ongoing kind of demonization. We saw it with Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi, that Putin is Hitler, and this is the way I think of simplifying it for people to have an emotional reaction to these things. But you're right, it has been turned up, the volume has been turned up quite a bit this week, and it's really interesting how it started, because I see this pattern all the time when you have an increase in intervention. There was a study that came out from a think tank, and that always seems to spurn things, and it said that if the U.S. is going to stop Russian aggression, we need to send $3 billion worth of defensive weapons to Ukraine. And
are they non-lethal, or are they lethal as well?
I think they're lethal, but only in defense.
Oh, okay.
So they must have some software. But if you look, you scratch everyone. New think tank. The idea of a think tank. These are smart people. They're thinking so hard. But you scratch the surface. This think tank that put it out was completely run by old Clinton appointees, Obama appointees, Michelle Flournoy, who may well be Secretary of Defense in the Hillary Clinton administration. She was big in this. they're all funded by the military-industrial complex.
I never guessed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Poroshenko just the other day mentioned that I'm convinced that the United States will provide these weapons, $3 billion worth of weapon. And I said, yeah, I'm probably pretty convinced they will too, but I wouldn't say it's the United States because that's sort of vague. The American taxpayers are going to get stuck for this, and who's going to be the most happy about this? Of course, it's the people who get to build the weapons, which is a real tragedy. But, you know, Congress participates. This is the whole other thing. I think this is one of the things that I have to deal with for so long, and that is the war propaganda. You know, whether it was back in the Persian Gulf War, which was 1990, 90, 91, that area, propaganda for war. And I remember very clearly, you know, when they were building up the propaganda for going into Iraq in 1998. But they always say, well, this resolution is for peace, you know, but it was ongoing. I mean, the description of these resolutions was always, you know, so wonderful. We bring about peace, but they never talk about the consequences, which have been utterly tragic. So I think this mess we have in the Middle East started way back, you know, in the early 1990s and has continued. But the one that seems to be so unnecessary and popped up is this thing in Ukraine. And every day, even this morning's paper had, well, we have to stop Russian aggression. And I don't know how they get away with this. And what about these accusations that, you know, from the Western Ukrainians that the Russians have soldiers on the ground there? Do you think there's any evidence that they have soldiers on the ground?
Well, I think Russia has admitted that there are individuals in their individual capacity that have gone over and volunteered. This is right next door. Many of them have relatives, very close relatives across the border. You know, remember these borders were kind of, they didn't exist when there was a Soviet Union, so these are relatively new borders. So they've admitted there are individuals, but they're saying the Russian army as such, there's absolutely no evidence that there's a battalion of Russians marching in with tanks and APCs. And the Russians have said, show us your evidence. You know, we've got satellites spying on our license plates, we found out last week, you know.
So there's no evidence of the accusations that Russia's about to march into Poland and take over Europe. I mean, that to me is just over the top.
Well, you know, even the Ukrainian chief of general staff, one of the top-ranking military officials in Ukraine, said last week, there are no regular Russian military in Ukraine. We're fighting irregulars. So even their own military people admit it.
Well, you just pointed out some, you know, moral justification for people in Russia to be concerned about their relatives and they want to help. And that tends to be the case around the world. There's a lot of Americans go different places to help groups that they're sympathetic to. But I would think that there's more justification there than, say, our special forces and our CIA being involved in contriving, you know, to overthrow an elected government. You know, Yanukovych was overthrown. But how many Americans know this?
That's the thing we talked about earlier. The way the media reports it, everything started when Putin took over Crimea. The U.S. media never talks about the fact that there was a referendum in Crimea, and they certainly never talk about several months earlier when the U.S. supported this coup against an elected government in Ukraine. That's what started it, because the people in the East said, hang on a minute, we voted for the guy in the West. We don't want him to be overthrown. This is undemocratic. And they said, okay, if you're going to do that, then we're going to break away. They want to secede. They don't want to be part of an illegitimate system.
You know, when this started, I wanted to lean toward optimism, and I hope I can continue to do it. And my optimistic statement was, yeah, this is terrible, it's dumb, but they can't get anywhere. And I found all the statistics on trade that Russia had with Europeans, trade with Americans, our investments over there, into the tune of billions of dollars, a lot more with Europe than with us. And, you know, the saying that even the founders preach was that when you're trading with people and dealing with people, you're less likely to fight with people. And I thought, they're not going to do it. It's been so much better from what I remembered, you know, during the Korean War, how we dealt with problems with China. We were killing each other. And as much as the criticism of Nixon was about going to China, I thought, well, this is good, and we're not about to bomb China. Hopefully we don't get there. But this whole thing about, what's happening in Europe is interesting because it seems to be escalating. At the same time, there's a lot of interest. We had a bunch of German business people saying, hey, hold off, this isn't good. But then we have NATO involved, United States involved, we have the European Union involved, and they're all saying we have to more sanctions. But some business people say, no, that's not put on sanctions. And what about this? What do you think about, Merkel and Hollande going to Moscow? I think I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I hope my optimism will come through and they'll come to their senses.
What some of the press has reported is especially Hollande was under a lot of pressure from the business community in France. Look, first of all, we do not want any provision of arms in Ukraine. That's just adding fuel to the fire. But B, we need some relief from sanctions. This is a major trading partner, and following the U.S. is just suicidal at this point. So, as you point out, Merkel and Hollande went to Kiev and then went on to Moscow. And apparently from the media reports, the U.S. had no idea this was happening. They've been caught off guard. And so there's some speculation that they're trying to find a way out of this disaster. And, of course, the U.S. is just ratcheting it up.
In a way, we have to end up with some mixed feelings about this because I want the Europeans to wake up and reject this notion that they should do our bidding all the time. And yet at the same time, we as Americans think, well, that means you're putting America down. But, I believe if we had a different foreign policy, it would be the most pro-American, pro-peace policy that you can conceive of. So, yes, I hope the Europeans do what is in their best interest. And if it's saying that, America, we don't need your help any longer. And that, to me, is what we should be seeking. And that is peace and prosperity. And hopefully that you will continue your work in the Institute for Peace and Prosperity and do get some information out there that you can't get on TV. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Channel and Liberty Report. So please come back soon.
Okay, that was from Ron Paul on YouTube. It was a Liberty Report. Now, to go back to the vaccines, we'll get into Russia and everything here in a little bit. But to get back to the vaccines, this out of Reuters, California measles outbreak possibly linked to Philippines, officials say. So the same outbreak that they are demonizing people, and they already have the fight started. Even though this is coming out, the pro-vaccine people are still going to be pushing the same fear agenda. We see it in the mainstream media all the time, that even when facts come out that go, okay, maybe this isn't exactly what we thought it was, they still keep pushing the same narrative and call for, more legislation to force you into something. And you best bet that Obamacare will be playing a role in more of this type of stuff because, well, now we're in Obamacare and you see, we're in control and we're going to just make it a part of your thing that for you to stay insured that you must keep up on your vaccines. And I could definitely see that coming down the pipe. But again, out of Reuters, California measles outbreak possibly linked to Philippines, officials say. A measles outbreak that has sickened at least 113 people in California after surfacing at Disneyland Resort involves a virus strain that also caused an outbreak in the Philippines, but it's too early to tell if the two waves of illness are related, health officials said. And I've pointed this out at the beginning that, it's Disneyland. You have a lot of people from Asia and Eurasia and Middle East area, maybe in that area, India, Philippines, China, Japan. You have those type of people that go into Disneyland a lot. You have a lot of European people that go to Disney World. It just happens to be what's closest on the map, so that's where they go. Unless they're going out west. But it's one of those things that we know tourists end up there. It says here the measles outbreak that began in late December renewed a debate about some parents' decisions not to vaccinate their children over fears about potential side effects of vaccines, which were largely fueled by now debunked research suggesting the inoculations have a link to autism. And it says right here, which this is definitely false. It says, which were largely fueled by now debunked research. No, it's not even debunked. The groups that are behind the autism, let's say, Autism Speaks, are closely aligned with the Gates Foundation. Well, what else does the Gates Foundation have their paws in? Oh, vaccinations. So you have a group that's basically being financed by the same people that are financing the vaccination research and development. So it doesn't really make sense that they're going to look at vaccines in a negative light, taking it the person that's funding them also is heavily involved in vaccines. And then he's also heavily, well, the Gates Foundation and Bill Gates and Melinda Gates are heavily involved in GMOs. And I recently seen Mrs. Gates with one of the heads of Facebook talking about how they're going to move forward with social media. And if you're someone that goes, well, why does it make a difference? Well, one, you can't expect that autistic organization to speak out against something that their main financer is probably involved in. Two, if you understand Bill Gates's family history and ideology and eugenics, that tends to raise another red flag. Now, I'm not saying he is the most evilest guy, but the things I've heard from him and the history I know about his family and the path that he's taken and what he has his hands in would make me definitely question anything that he would have his hands in. But, everybody has that choice. And if you choose to get vaccines, eat GMO food, and, have an autistic kid that you take to Autism Speaks, and involve yourself in that, that is your freedom of choice to do so. And I would not abridge that right either. But no one should abridge my right to choose. And that's the main issue. But it says here, California Department of Public Health researchers in a report to federal officials released on Friday said the source of the illness that sickened visitors at Disney theme park in December has not been identified. Specimens from 30 California patients were genotyped. All were measles genotype B3, which has caused a large outbreak recently in the Philippines, but has also been detected in at least 14 countries and at least 6 U.S. states in the last 6 months, the report stated. The Disneyland Resort, located in Anaheim, in Southern California receives millions of visitors a year, with many of them coming from overseas. The report posted on the website of the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said the outbreak illustrates the need for high measles vaccine rates in the United States. On Tuesday, California public health officials urged residents to vaccinate themselves and their children before traveling internationally over spring school break. Oh my gosh. Propaganda is foolish right there. And I have one here out of Infowars.com. Vaccine victims tell their story. It says Infowars producer Marcus Morales joined Alex Jones to break down a personal vaccine story and revealed that the adverse reactions his daughter experienced shortly after a round of shots. My way to fight back was I would give people factual information, Morales said. I'd give them the articles with the studies, the data, and nothing really rang true with them unless my personal side came out. And then I would say, well, you know, when my first child came, the second time we visited the doctor, we went a little later than our date, so the doctor said we had to put 4 vaccines in that day because we missed the other 2. I was a first-time parent. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't do my homework, obviously, and so I went along with it. And then that night, she just out of control started crying. Her eyes were bright red. Her head was on fire, and she was inconsolable for 3 days. And into the first night, her fever spiked to 103.7. After calling the doctor, Marcus was told that his daughter was simply experiencing a normal reaction. Unfortunately, countless other children have experienced even worse reactions to vaccines that have caused permanent damage. And we've heard this multiple times from many people, and it's just a shame that we have people that are willing to try to force this upon others when we know that there isn't a conclusion, there isn't a safe vaccine that has been actually proven. But of course, government always takes any type of tragedy, really, and use it to their advantage and to push what they want. And a lot of these people are either eugenists or just people that are power hungry. But they are not working in your best interest. Now, another thing that's been, I've talked to many people about this, is this whole net neutrality, whether it be SOPA, CISPA, net neutrality. Every time we see any of these bills come up, any attempt to take control of the internet, what we end up seeing is all of a sudden there's hacks going on just in time to try to push a bill through. And luckily they haven't had really any effect. But this net neutrality, we had Sony get hacked, and people are still, fighting against net neutrality. And now we've had them come out talking about the banks being hacked and billions of dollars disappear. I have one here from AMTV. Bank hack, $1 billion false flag to censor the internet. So I'm going to go ahead and cue this up here. Maybe.
I believe we have to be guided by some basic principles. So let me share those with you today. First, this has to be a shared mission. So much of our computer networks and critical infrastructure are in the private sector, which means government cannot do this alone. But the fact is that the private sector can't do it alone either, because it's government that often has the latest information on new threats. There's only one way to defend America from these cyber threats, and that is through government and industry working together, sharing appropriate information as true partners.
Are you and your family prepared for a grid failure? Shield yourself from blackouts with a home backup system or portable off-grid solar energy system from Off-Grid Depot. Off-Grid Depot also supplies water pumps, DC appliances, and other products for off-the-grid living. Power your prep. Bug out vehicle, shelter, or remote location with a power system from Off-Grid Depot today. Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. It is Monday, President's Day, February 16th. And sometimes the propaganda is just very easy to detect. You know, you kind of get your bullshit meter out, and it's easy. It's just right there, right in front of all of our faces. Let me give you an example. Allegedly, according to a Russian security firm, that's no accident, the Pentagon, the State Department's positioning it as if this leak came from Russia, our enemy, so nobody will question it. Allegedly, there was a big heist, kind of along the lines of Ocean's 11, the movie, you know, with Brad Pitt and George Clooney stealing tons of money in Las Vegas. Allegedly, in over 100 banks in over 30 countries, up to $1 billion was stolen by cyber criminals. Yeah, that's right. Cyber criminals made ATM machines spew cash, which we all know this is possible from the late Barnaby Jack, a very famous hacker who showed this, actually, I believe in Las Vegas, and then mysteriously died. Very young guy. I think he was around his 30s. He was going to show in the upcoming conference before his death how he was able to, with a couple keystrokes, turn off the pacemakers to millions of Americans' hearts. Just mysteriously died. Kind of like, you know, Michael Hastings, his car, some people think was taken over, which we now know people told us was a conspiracy theory, but can actually be done. We've seen this in recent reports where they can take over your car via Bluetooth, and they could crash it into a building, let's say, and potentially get rid of you if they didn't like you. But allegedly, according to the New York Times, which just happens to be a mouthpiece of the Obama administration, at the same time Obama is pushing for internet censorship and internet legislation on the heels of another false flag, the North Korean alleged hack of Sony Pictures, even though it's come out after the fact. Numerous investigators, independent thinkers, journalists, those within the technology community say it's much more likely that it was an inside job at Sony Pictures itself and or the State Department. All of this comes at a convenient time to jam more fear down the throats of innocent Americans. That at any moment, at any time, not only your company, your computer, but the nation's banking system can be hacked. Allegedly over up to $1 billion was stolen. Also interesting about the report, they say, again, it came from a Russian security agency, which we know is just a typical way that they would stage this storyline. They've been doing it for years. Had specifically attacked the banking system in Ukraine, where we're also at war, where the ceasefire that they passed yesterday on February 15th actually has only resulted in more shelling. In fact, I tweeted out a couple of reports via the BBC and NBC saying there is no ceasefire. They're still fighting. I even posted a video on it yesterday. So this comes at a perfect time where not only all this is going on, the false flag Sony hack, this big push for internet censorship, a new executive action, an executive order courtesy of this scumbag at the president of the United States, but also at the same time he's meeting in Stanford to speak with the likes of Tim Cook about Apple Pay and internet security, saying that he needs to control the Wild West. Isn't it convenient that we just happen to have up to $1 billion stolen from over 100 financial institutions around the world, in the United States, in Europe, in the Ukraine, and in Japan, in over 30 countries? Isn't it convenient? So Obama can push his agenda through the mouthpiece of the New York Times, which was the first mainstream bullshit media organization to break the story. So they're just serving this up on a silver platter, folks. You need Big Brother to save you. I mean, with all these hacks, they definitely need to legislate and control the internet. So, they can shut down AM TV, alternative media television. They can shut down and censor the Drudge Report. Of course they need this legislation because they're losing control of the internet. They no longer have their mouthpieces. Let me give you an example. When the Brian Williams story came out that he had lied about his being shot down in a helicopter in Iraq, I was surprised, not by the fact that he lied. I didn't know the guy was still on the air. I mean, I'm being serious. I honestly didn't know Brian Williams still had a Tonight Show. I mean, that's how much of a dinosaur media these big institutions are that have been state-run for years, that are mouthpieces to Barack Obama. It's exactly why they need to legislate the internet and shut down little guys like us, AM TV, alternative media television, and the Drudge Report, which actually, I guess we're not too little because we're moving millions and millions of eyeballs every single month. We're growing into perpetuity, doubling every single year because people are demanding the truth. So, of course, there's this big push for internet censorship, and it's why we're being bombarded by all these stories, all these alleged hacks, this alleged incident at over 100 financial institutions, not just here in the States, but around the world. God forbid they digitally steal money, which also is kind of interesting because it brings up the concept of money, which really is just a total illusion. I mean, what these alleged hackers did is they, using accounting software that they had learned by video recording the computer screens, allegedly, of these banking institutions and the employees, were able to just switch an account balance from $1,000 and add another zero, and then transfer that money into dummy accounts around the world, or make ATM machines spit money. But I have a question for you. If that's illegal, then how is it that the Federal Reserve can do the exact same thing? I mean, if up to $1 billion was stolen, which actually is not a lot of money at all, it's pretty minute. It's minutia compared to the $4.5 trillion worth of debt on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet that they print digitally by just a keystroke, by just adding, instead of one zero, multiple zeros into infinity. How is that not illegal? But how is it that alleged cyber criminals doing it is? Again, it makes no sense. And it points out what an illusion the whole money system is. And more importantly, the Federal Reserve, how criminal that institution actually is. Our money's not backed by anything, folks. There's nothing behind it. It's not tangible. It's not real. It's fake. They pointed out with this story. So again, I expect more and more of a bombardment of these types of stories, of this type of propaganda, of course, which is very easy to detect. Because again, the president, he's been telegraphing this, folks. It's why they engineered the Sony hack story, false flag. It is why they've engineered this story with cyber criminals allegedly coming from a Russian security firm. They're the ones that broke the news so that, it wouldn't raise an eyebrow, although it's an obvious tactic, courtesy of the State Department, the Central Intelligence Agencies here in the United States, to push for this agenda. It's at the same time that not only President Barack Obama is meeting and speaking at Stanford next to Tim Cook about integrating the Apple Pay system, the mark of the beast, here in the United States of America, and integrating it with the federal government, but also at the same time he's established new independent agencies to regulate the internet, and also signed an executive order against Congress, bypassing Congress once again. You know, it's time that the American people wake up. I mean, honestly, guys, how dumb can Americans be? Can you not connect the dots? This is very easy to detect. It's obvious what the agenda is. It's obvious where the information is coming from. Again, the New York Times, a mouthpiece for the Obama administration, the liberal left. You see, it's these people that we need to be afraid of. It's not Vladimir Putin, you know, as they paint him as the next Hitler, the next boogeyman, the next man out to destroy the world. It's not these other countries. It's not the Middle East. It's not ISIS. Speaking of ISIS, how is it? I have a question for you. How is it ISIS didn't even exist about a year ago, but suddenly it's the biggest story and the biggest topic in regards to mainstream media attention at the moment? How is that possible? A follow-up question. Where did ISIS come from? I thought Obama killed Osama bin Laden. I thought Al-Qaeda was over with. How is it possible that we now have a new boogeyman? You see how it's just the ISIS is just the equivalent of what Al-Qaeda was to Bush, ISIS is to Obama? It's just a boogeyman they create out of thin air. Not that they aren't real, but that they create out of thin air and propagandize to serve their agenda in the Middle East, in these parts of the world. Again, it's a tool. That's all it is. It's a tool of propaganda. It's a tool being used by the CIA, by the State Department. Just like the Sony hack is a tool, just like this alleged banking hack is a tool. Again, we need to be worried. They actually think that we need to be worried about up to $1 billion stolen from financial institutions? How about the trillions of dollars stolen from taxpayers? How about the trillions of dollars of bank bailouts of these criminals running rampant? None of them going to jail. We should be worried about that. We should be worried about the real issues. We should be targeting the Federal Reserve with an audit. That's where the focus should be. Not on legislating the internet, not on tearing it apart, not on pissing out our Constitution, not on shutting down small independent think tanks like AMTV. I need your...
Okay, that was Christopher Green, AMTV. Check him out on YouTube, see other videos by him. Okay, I did want to play what he was talking about, if I can find it here. I'm trying to find it here. Okay. I have to skip through this. I'm trying to get the actual clip, that way I don't have to skip through. Okay, here we are. This is Obama at the Cybersecurity Summit. And I want to try to find the part where he talks about the merging.
Hello, Stanford. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a seat. Have a seat. Yes, we can. Like, I kind of want to go here. I was trying to figure out why it is that great advisor to me at the White House and as an outstanding ambassador to Russia. My cabinet, our Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, is here, and our Small Business Administrator, Maria. Over the past 59 months, our businesses have created nearly 12 million new jobs, which is the longest streak of private sector job growth on record. And in a hopeful sign for middle-class families, wages are beginning to rise again. And meanwhile, we're doing more to prepare our young people for a competitive world. Our high school graduation rate has hit an all-time high. More Americans are finishing college than ever before. Here at Stanford and across the country, we've got the best universities, we've got the best scientists, the best researchers in the world. We've got the most dynamic economy in the world. And no place represents that better than this region. So make no mistake, more than any other nation on earth, the United States is positioned to lead in the 21st century. And so much of our economic competitiveness is tied to what brings me here today, and that is America's leadership in the digital economy. It's our ability, almost unique across the planet, our ability to innovate and to learn and to discover and to create and build and do business online and stretch the boundaries of what's possible. That's what drives us. And so when we had to decide where to have this summit, the decision was easy, because so much of our information age began right here at Stanford. It was here where two students, Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard, met, and then in the garage not far from here started a company that eventually built one of the first personal computers, weighing in at 40 pounds. It was from here in 1968 where a researcher, Douglas Engelbart, astonished an audience with two computers connected online, and hypertext you could click on with something called a mouse. A year later, a computer here received the first message from another computer 350 miles away, the beginnings of what would eventually become the internet. And by the way, it's no secret that many of these innovations built on government-funded research is one of the reasons that if we want to maintain cyber threat intelligence integration center, just like we do with terrorist threats, we're going to have a single entity that's analyzing and integrating and quickly sharing intelligence about cyber threats across government so we can act on all those threats even faster. And today we're taking an additional step, which is why there's a desk here. You were wondering, I'm sure. I'm signing a new executive order to promote even more information sharing about cyber threats, both within the private sector and between government and the private sector. And it will encourage more companies and industries to set up organizations, hubs, so you can share information with each other. It'll call for a common set of standards, including protections for privacy and civil liberties, so the government can share threat information with these hubs more easily. And it can help make it easier for companies to get the classified cybersecurity threat information that they need to protect their companies. I want to acknowledge, by the way, that the companies who are represented here are stepping up as well. The Cyber Threat Alliance, which includes companies like Palo Alto Networks and Symantec, are going to work with us to share more information under this new executive order. You've got companies from Apple to Intel, from Bank of America to PG&E, who are going to use the cyber security framework to strengthen their own defenses. As part of our Buy Secure initiative, Visa and MasterCard and American Express and others are going to make their transactions more secure. NationStar is joining companies that are giving their companies another weapon to battle identity theft, and that's free access to their credit scores. And more companies are moving to new, stronger technologies to authenticate user identities, like biometrics, because it's just too easy for hackers to figure out user names and passwords like password or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. Those are some of my previous passwords. I've changed them since then. So this summit's an example of what we need more of. All of us working together to do what none of us can achieve alone.
I'm going to stop it there. So basically what he's saying is he's did a reach around Congress, signed an executive order, basically validating what NSA and government and these private corporations already have been doing when we've already heard about, the secret room at AT&T where there was a splitter box that took all the information that went over AT&T's network and sent one copy to where the intention was for it to go, and another copy went to a secret room that was ran by the NSA. But now he's doing executive orders. So now basically he's working on net neutrality without Congress in a way. Not the net neutrality that they're talking about, faster connection, broadband. No. In the broad scheme of it all, the net neutrality is nothing more than control over the internet. But by doing this, that they're just validating what they're already doing, meaning that they don't have to worry any longer about covering that up because, there's executive order for it. So now we got to cover up what we plan on doing anyways, whether we get net neutrality or any type of SOPA, CISPA, any of that type of stuff pass. It just keeps getting bigger. And biometrics, I think, is one of the worst things because, you could try to torture someone's password out of them. Of course, hackers can get it, but hackers can remember, if you're putting biometrics into a computer, all it turns into is ones and zeros, so it's still hackable. And if that's a validation, if people start using that for validation, it's nothing more than another tool. One place that I have employment at wanted to put new time clocks in. Oh, they got a biometric fingerprint time. No, I'll quit. I don't rely on these type of jobs. I like to work with my hands. I like to do that type of work. So, I look at it as a voluntary contractual agreement for my labor for cash. So, I had no problem quitting over something like that. And basically they were like, oh, well, we don't want that to happen. And they definitely stayed away from that. So biometrics, I definitely don't trust, definitely for a validation source, because now too, they wouldn't have to torture a password out of you if someone was trying to break into your house and access your computer or access your safe and it has a code, and you know that you don't want them in there, no matter what. Definitely, maybe if it was a gun safe or something, you wouldn't want someone breaking into your gun safe and getting guns that could potentially kill people in the hands of these people. And they could just shoot you and take your thumb and swipe it over. So I'm not a big truster in biometrics as a security tool. And I've read plenty of stuff from people in the tech world talking about how it's the biggest fallacy for security. That it's an illusion of safety when in reality it's just as bad as anything else. I was reading one guy talking about how simple it is to grab biometrics and be able to access other biometrics just by looking at how many points that it measures a fingerprint. And a lot of biometrics will work on a certain group of type of points. So, let's say it measures 5 points on your thumb. Well, if you find another one system that uses that 5 point, it's usually going to be the same pattern. And therefore, the ones and zeros are easily transferable to another device to unlock. And so it is hackable. And there was other people talking about it. And I do think it is a fallacy. But I have something here that was kind of interesting. This was shared on Fox Business on Facebook. It's about Windows 10. And make sure it's not too loud.
Microsoft will give your password a high-tech update by using your fingerprints and eye scans as its new user authentications in the upcoming Windows 10 operating system that is due out later this year. Microsoft is supporting what's called the Fast Identity Online Alliance. It's also used by companies like Google, Samsung, and Bank of America.
Now let me play that one more time.
Microsoft will give your password a high-tech update by using your fingerprints and eye scans as its new user authentications in the upcoming Windows 10 operating system that is due out later this year. Microsoft is supporting what's called the Fast Identity Online Alliance. It's also used by companies like Google, Samsung, and Bank of America.
Okay. Now, here from Wikipedia, FIDO Alliance, the Fast Identity Online Alliance, is an industry consortium launched in February 2013 to address the lack of interoperability among strong authentication devices and the problems users face creating and remembering multiple usernames and passwords. PayPal and Limbo were among the founders. Its aim is that its specifications will support a full range of authentication technologies, including biometrics such as fingerprint and iris scanners, voice and facial recognition, as well as existing solutions communication standards such as trusted platform modules, USB security tokens, embedded secure elements, smart cards, and near-field communication. I think this is just going to go way overboard. It says here, criticism. There has been concern over the choices in crypto used by FIDO, especially the FIDO specification, requires the use of elliptic curve SECP256R1. There is a concern that this specific curve is backdoored. However, the cited item in the UAF protocol specification is driven by the reference channel ID internet draft, which is specification that actually normatively relies upon the elliptic curve. Observers note that there is a new draft approach to TLS token binding. I just don't trust biometrics. I really don't want to be involved in it. And I think this should be the biggest reason for another company to come out of the woodworks to be able to really blow Windows out of the water, blow many of these by creating a Windows, Apple type platform that doesn't feed into all this crap, really. It's definitely kind of going overboard by now. But it seems that's where we're going as of now. Okay. Having a little issue here. Move on to some foreign news here. One here out of Ben Swan. Libya and ISIS not a failed state. It's a collapsed state thanks to U.S. and NATO. I'm going to play this here.
Report is out today claiming that ISIS has burned to death 45 people in the town of al-Baghdadi in Iraq. That town just a 13-minute drive from a U.S. Marine base. Who was burned alive and why is still not known. Meanwhile, in response to 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians being executed by ISIS over the weekend, not only has Egypt begun airstrikes against the Islamic State, but is now calling for the United Nations to authorize international intervention against ISIS, specifically in Libya. RT correspondent Paula Sleer has more.
The Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is urging the international community to intervene in fighting Islamic State in Libya. He says that they are a threat to world peace and security, and he's also calling for immediate, urgent, and effective action. It comes as Egyptian warplanes bomb at least 2 ISIS strongholds inside Libya. Reports suggest that at least 60 militants have been killed. Egypt has also boosted its security presence throughout the country. Now, this is in response to a video that was posted online by a militant group operating inside Libya that has sworn allegiance to the Islamic State. In the video, the alleged beheadings of 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians is shown. Now, Libya, ever since 2011, has been in a state of disarray. This followed the overthrow of the former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi and the bombing of the country by Western warplanes. What is particularly worrisome from this video is that a militant speaks in English, threatening Europe that they will be next. And what we also see now is that the traditional stronghold of ISIS, Iraq and Syria, has now been broadened to include Libya.
And that was RT correspondent Paula Sleer. Now, the airstrikes by Egypt, as we mentioned, surround the beheadings of those 21 Coptic Christians. Though all 21 men were from Egypt, they had gone to Libya to look for work. And what the story is demonstrating is that ISIS is no longer just controlling areas in simply Iraq and Syria. If you're not familiar with exactly where Libya is located, it is worth looking at on a map, because while Iraq and Syria are centered in the Middle East, Libya is not. Right now, ISIS is setting up training camps in Libya. It is not only a North African nation, but it's directly across the Mediterranean Sea from Italy and the rest of Europe. During the video of the apparent beheadings of those 21 Egyptian hostages in Libya, an ISIS militant says, quote, "We will conquer Rome by Allah's permission," end quote. Well, it is that location in Libya that media is very concerned about, the ability of ISIS to launch attacks against Europe. In fact, here's Fox News anchor Shepard Smith.
Libya, how in the world could you ever even begin to solve this problem militarily without something on the ground? There's no Libyan government, is there?
Well, there's an internationally recognized government, but it doesn't even control the capital in Tripoli.
And that is true. But in the midst of this story, which is getting huge amounts of mainstream coverage, media is ignoring why there is no government, why Libya is a breeding ground for ISIS, why this North African country with direct access to Europe is falling under ISIS control. To understand, just go back exactly 4 years. February of 2011, and the so-called Arab Spring was underway in Libya. The U.S. insisted that freedom fighters, who would later be identified, many of them as al-Qaeda fighters, needed help in their fight against Libyan ruler Muammar Gaddafi. The U.S. and coalition partners decided that a no-fly zone would be necessary to help rebel groups fighting Gaddafi.
The first thing, though, is you tell the Libyan pilots that if they fly, sooner or later, that they're going to die. And you will find that has a very remarkable effect on their desire to fly. Second of all, the 4 bases around Tripoli are the areas where their air assets are located. So you're not talking about covering all of Libya.
That interview was in March of 2011. So the U.S. and coalition partners did, in fact, create a no-fly zone over Libya. Again, in March of that year. But the Gaddafi regime held on, and so the U.S. and NATO began a bombing campaign. Finally, in October of 2011, an armed U.S. Predator drone struck a convoy carrying Libyan ruler Muammar Gaddafi. Rebel fighters converged on the scene, pulling Gaddafi from his SUV and killing him on the street. At the time, President Obama bragged about how his administration had set the Libyan people free.
For 4 decades, the Gaddafi regime ruled the Libyan people with an iron fist. Basic human rights were denied. Innocent civilians were detained, beaten, and killed. And Libya's wealth was squandered. The enormous potential of the Libyan people was held back, and terror was used as a political weapon. Today, we can definitively say that the Gaddafi regime has come to an end.
So here we are, less than 4 years after the death of Muammar Gaddafi, and now media analysts say the U.S. must intervene in the fallen state of Libya, while completely ignoring that Libya is not a fallen state. It is a collapsed state, collapsed by the United States and NATO. Joining me now to talk about this is Vijay Prashad, the author of Arab Spring, Libyan Winter, and the professor of international studies at Trinity College. Vijay, thank you so much for being here. You know, it's difficult to watch media when they talk about stories like this because they seem to do so from within a vacuum, as if there's no history, no cause and effect, as if, in fact, we were led into this massive military intervention just 4 years ago. They've completely flipped the script on that. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. I mean, look, the issue here is that there is a situation that was directly created by the NATO intervention. There were some serious problems in Libya prior to the NATO intervention, but nothing of the scale which we see today. You know, there's no point going back and talking about a golden age in Libya. That didn't exist. But what we have now is precisely the consequence of the kind of war NATO waged in Libya, destroying the infrastructure, collapsing the state, and allowing a bunch of different militia groups to be valorized, to be treated as heroes, without at any point trying to bring them under any kind of state command. And I should say that right after the NATO government took power in Tripoli, there were oil workers' strikes, there were protests by various Islamist groups, and the crackdown against them was severe. And so there was a double standard operating. You know, when Gaddafi conducted his crackdown, which was despicable, the NATO decided to bomb. Meanwhile, when NATO's government was cracking down, people turned their eyes away. And it was that crackdown that, in a sense, metastasized into chaos, didn't bring the population of Libya together, created a situation where today there are two governments. And in that chaos, of course, what breathes most effectively is this group that calls itself the Islamic State.
And because the Islamic State obviously is a very well-organized and extremely well-funded, wealthy group, they have the ability to step in when other government entities have been unable to do so. You know, media and politicians, you're talking about the responsibility issue here, have also ignored things like the death tolls among innocent civilians. You know, Human Rights Watch had a report from the NATO bombing campaign. They took a look at just 8 incidents of NATO bombings, of which there were many hundreds of them, but they looked at just 8 of them and found that at least 72 civilians were killed in just 8. And in those cases, a third of the victims involved were under the age of 18. And it seems like we have this heavy interventionist strategy that ignores any responsibility for anything that goes wrong. Is that part of the problem with the way that Western media especially regurgitates these stories?
Look, when NATO conducted its bombing, it was under a UN Security Council mandate, Resolution 1973. After the bombing had ceased, the UN asked for a complete audit of the operations of NATO based on a UN resolution. And NATO's lawyer, Peter Olson, wrote to the UN and said, NATO does not conduct human rights violations. You know, the level of impunity is quite egregious. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi is sitting currently in a prison in Zintan. There is no attempt to bring him to the International Criminal Court. And why I say this is not that I'm saying he should be brought to the court or shouldn't be, but the fact is that the war by NATO was conducted under a UN mandate. Apparently, they kept using language of rule of law, but meanwhile haven't followed through on any of the kind of procedures that are commonplace for any kind of rule of law. So yes, indeed, the question of impunity has to be on the table. But it's not only that. During the Syrian crisis, Libyan fighters were funneled in a pipeline from Derna, from various parts of eastern Libya, into Turkey to cross the border in Syria and join the fight against the Assad government, go into Iraq and fight against the Iraq government. So there has been, with the complete connivance of Western intelligence, Gulf Arab intelligence, the further radicalization of Libyan youth from eastern Libya, and now this is plainly blowback.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. It also was important to mention that in order to wage this campaign in Libya in 2011, there were fighters being shipped from Pakistan and from Afghanistan who had fought against U.S. troops and been captured. They were being sent to Libya and did interviews with Italian newspapers where they said, yes, we're al-Qaeda fighters and we're good Muslims and we're here to overthrow Gaddafi. And that was very clear at the time. And again, Western media ignored it. Last thing I would ask you about, as we're running out of time, though, you used the word blowback as you were ending that last statement. Blowback is something that you have people like Congressman Ron Paul, or former Congressman Ron Paul, who have talked about blowback, and yet he's talking about it on a scale of about 30 to 20 years. He'll talk about arming the Mujahideen in the late 70s and 80s, and then it turning out to be 9/11 when that group eventually becomes al-Qaeda. But instead of having to wait 20 years to see the effects of our foreign policy, it seems like we're living in an accelerated age where we're only having to wait 2 to 4 years. It was 4 years ago that NATO conducts this bombing campaign, the no-fly zone, and now, exactly 4 years to the month of when we first started having the calls for the no-fly zone, we're seeing, ISIS beheading these Coptic Christians in Libya. Are we looking at an accelerated rate of blowback?
This is a very good point. And let me just give you an example of even more accelerated blowback. The Egyptian government has about 200,000 of its nationals working as workers inside Libya. 21 of them had been picked up by ISIS and were executed. The Egyptian government then decided to send 3 fighter jets to fly for 90 minutes over the city of Derna, and they bombed 8 sites. Meanwhile, having done that, they didn't take out their 200,000 citizens from inside Libya, and more people, therefore, have been kidnapped in the last 24 hours. The blowback is severe. Meanwhile, in Tripoli, the other government in Libya has condemned Egyptian intervention. That government is backed by the Muslim Brotherhood, which is being persecuted inside Egypt. So I want you to understand that the tangle of politics in North Africa is so great now that blowback is, as you made, it's an excellent point, has been accelerated. It is going to now move at a greater speed in North Africa, and the chaos is going to increase. There is no way that aerial bombardment, either by the Egyptians or the West, is going to solve this problem. It is naive to believe that. The direct way forward is political, and I'm afraid nobody in the West understands the politics of North Africa to really create a path towards not peace, but some kind of modus vivendi between the various parties.
We will definitely keep an eye on it, and we'll bring you back to continue to discuss this with us as we see this timeline continue to accelerate. Professor Vijay Prashad, author of Arab Spring, Libyan Winter, thanks so much for your time on this.
Thank you.
benswan.com. You can find that at. And it's titled Libya and ISIS, Not a Failed State, a Collapsed State, Thanks to U.S. and NATO. Now, there were a lot of things that were touched on in that. And the main thing is blowback. And, you know, he made a great point. You know, we can look at, well, if we look at Al-Qaeda, the creation of Al-Qaeda, that we can take that back how many years, you know? Iran, you can look at the blowback by looking what U.S. intervention has done in Iran. But the timelines of these are very drawn out compared to what we're seeing now, where he said 4 years, and I'm thinking more 2 years, 3 years, that this is really happening, and that we're seeing the blowback. Just because it doesn't become a mainstream topic at that point doesn't mean. And, you know, you look at some of the other blowback scenarios, like what Ron Paul talks about a lot, those you probably can see it a lot sooner, and I'm sure he's seen it a lot sooner, but it becomes mainstream conversation, you know, a little bit later down the road to the people that didn't see it coming, even though for some of us it seems obvious. And, you know, how long have we been talking about this, the intervention in Libya, the trying to go into Syria, and Iraq, you know, Afghanistan. We've seen that, you know, hello, let's stop this. There's going to be blowback, and no one's listening. And we're you know, you throw your hands up like, what? I've said this, and, you know, we have those people that we got to defend our country against those foreigners. Are, you know, ignorant of the fact that the foreigners aren't the main threat. It's our own government that's our main threat, and their actions are what are creating that threat. Therefore, it's really the main threat is government, and it will always be in any society that decides to have government, that accepts the concept of government. It will be your greatest enemy, because it will be what abridges your rights the most, unless you are one of the few statistics that it's another individual, you know, harming you, or if you just happen to fall in a time that your country has been invaded by a foreign government, but it's still government. Government will always end up being the enemy, and I think history has always proven that. And it might not be the enemy to the people in power, that go down in history books as either a good leader or bad leader, but they were a leader. A lot of times what's left out is the life story of the individuals that government abused. And I think the internet, video cameras, cell phones, all of this has really contributed to a revolution and evolution in how history will be perceived in the future. And that's another reason why things that Obama and our government's doing when it comes to internet and trying to take control over it threatens this. But right now we have it for this time that we're able to record history in a way that shows all the sides. And they always say the winner gets to write history. Our data that people have been collecting, whether it be video, audio, text, all of this are going to be like the scrolls of the future. Even if we lose the fight for freedom, even if media becomes completely state-run, this data will be discovered in the future. There's not going to be a way to destroy it all, I don't believe. I think, there are preppers out there that are just, people might call them nuts, but you know what? They might be what saves the reality of history for the future. And no matter how it ends up, we need the truth to be heard. And for this time period, I think that with all the innovation we have and the ability to instantly stream something from your phone to the internet, from other people to see, to download, to copy onto a disc, put in a Faraday cage, and even if there's a EMP or a solar flare or something, it doesn't get wiped. I think we are evolutionizing and revolutionizing the way history is going to be written in the future. And, that's why we need to stay vigilant and keep recording reality. History won't be told Columbus was this explorer that came and discovered America. It's not going to be written that way. The truth will be out there, and we're seeing it more and more where, a lot of the youth doesn't trust what they were taught. So, it's coming down. I'm going to get into this article here from urbansurvivalsite.com. 15 reasons to prep even if doomsday never arrives. But before that, when it comes to prepping, whether it's looking at gold, silver, or other things, it's something vital, I think, for anybody that is worried about the future. I think most people know that the future isn't promised to us, and whether it's economic, natural disaster, or war, it's vital that you're prepared and you keep your family prepared. And UCY has partnered with Amazon.com, and they put together their own little store. And if you go to UCY.tv, there's a UCY store tab. Just click on that tab, it'll take you right to it. And you get the same great prices from Amazon.com, the same great deals. At the same time, UCY gets a little kickback from that to cover operating costs and keeping the network up to date. And, you know, whether it be camping, prepping, and even radiation, one of the best collections of prepping gear I've seen anywhere. UCY has put together, so you don't have to go searching through Amazon to find what you're looking for. You can just go to the UCY store, and they got everything right there for you. And they make it easy to find. And you get the same great deals that you would normally get from Amazon, and at the same time, you're helping support networks like this. And you know, another thing I do for prepping, it's something I do believe in, and I'd like to be diverse in how I put, you know, my wealth out there that I gain from my years. I do gold, silver, and I also do seeds. I do multiple things. I don't put all my eggs in one basket, but I do believe in gold and silver. And one thing about gold, you know, it's something that's been around for tens of thousands of years as a currency, no matter what generation or what governmental institution, gold and silver have value. Maybe not always the top of the value, but usually it's somewhere near there. And Amagi Metals is where I choose to buy my gold and silver, and have had a great experience with them, and I partnered with them. So you can get the same great prices. And if you go to antityrannynews.com/metal, it'll take you straight to Amagi Metals. And again, you get the same great prices. Some of the best prices I've personally seen, definitely when they allow you to buy small amounts and still get a great deal without having to buy large amounts. And they're introducing the tier program for their gold that will allow you to even get better deals. So they will be rivaling some of the big gold suppliers out there. When you do that, it helps us expand what we're trying to do, and it's getting harder and harder for alternative media to survive out there, definitely when the internet's constantly under attack. So it's really important that you support your alternative media, your new media, whatever you would like to call it. And again, that's UCY.tv, the UCY store tab. That's the Amazon partner. And antityrannynews.com/metal for Amagi Metals. And you get the same great deals, and you help support alternative media. Now to this article from urbansurvivalsite.com, 15 reasons to prep even if doomsday never arrives. After the stock market crash in 2008, many preppers warned that doomsday was imminent and that people should prepare while they still can. But doomsday never arrived. In fact, over the last years, things have gradually improved. The stock market is up, which the stock market doesn't tell you unless it's crashing. It says here, and unemployment is down. Because of this, some people are starting to get a little smug, saying things such as, "It looks like you did all that prepping for nothing." People said similar things after the end of the Cold War. The fallout shelter was a waste of money. After Y2K, you ran to the hills for no reason. And more recently about Ebola, I guess you won't need those pandemic supplies after all. So are they right? Are preppers a bunch of paranoid wackos? Well, first thing I kind of want to point out is the Ebola thing. They were allowing Ebola to be brought in the United States. They were purposely, I think, doing it, hoping that maybe it could spread and they could use that to their advantage, kind of like they're doing with the measles outbreak, which isn't really an outbreak. It's a small infection in very few people in all of America. says here, hardly just because those things didn't lead to doomsday doesn't mean doomsday will never arrive. The U.S. economy is more fragile than ever. Nuclear proliferation is still a problem, and a pandemic could happen at any time, but let's say doomsday never arrives. Would that mean all your preps were a waste of time? Hell no. There are many reasons for prepping is well worth the effort, even if the shit never hits the fan on a global scale. Here are 15. 1. Unemployment. How would you fare if you lost your job and the United States unemployment benefits only pay out about half of what you were earning with a maximum of $300 to $600 a week, depending on which state you live in, and in this economy it can take a long time to find another job, but if you're a prepper, you will already have food cash supplies on hand to help you get by until you find another job. Financial emergencies. Unemployment isn't the only situation where your preps could come in handy. Life is full of surprises, expenses, car repairs, medical bills, death in the family. Who knows? Prepping is like buying insurance against all sorts of unexpected problems. But unlike insurance, the money you spend on prepping doesn't go to waste if nothing happens, because most preps are things you will eat or use anyway. Never run out of anything. Too often people run out of microwavable meals and don't have the ingredients to make anything else, so they just order a pizza. But at least in the case you can get someone to bring you food, if you run out of dish soap or painkillers or toilet paper, rather than having to order food or make a run to the store, you already have everything you need. Save money. There are many ways prepping can help you save money. For one, when you go shopping, you can focus on buying items that are on sale. Something you normally buy isn't on sale. You can wait and buy more the next time it's on sale because you already have backup at home. Prepping is also a hedge against inflation. For example, if you are constantly rotating through a year's supply of food, then you are always paying last year's prices. Finally, as a prepper, you'll learn how to get multiple uses of items you normally throw away. Doing this can be a huge money saver. Retire early. If you save enough money and you learn how to be more self-sufficient, you might be able to retire several years earlier than you originally planned. If nothing else, perhaps you will afford to retire at 62 instead of 65. Car trouble. If your car breaks down and you're stranded somewhere until help arrives, imagine how much better your situation will be if you bottle water, snacks, and flashlight blankets, a solar charger for your phone, and other gear in your emergency vehicle kit or get home bag. Ordinary violence. When I was 6 years old, I lived in a pretty safe neighborhood. But one night, our neighbors got high on PCP, went crazy, and kicked in our front door, guns blazing, literally. Fortunately, the man with the gun was so confused that he actually handed it to my dad. Fortunately, no one was hurt. And eventually, the police arrived and arrested them. But that story could have ended very differently. The reason I share is to remind you that violent crimes happen every day, even in the areas that are relatively safe. But as a prepper, you'll learn how to secure your home against invaders and defend yourself if they somehow get in anyways. House fires, as I said in the post, every year there are over 350,000 house fires in the United States, but if you and your family have fire extinguishers and an escape plan, you'll have a much better chance of avoiding injury or death. Medical emergencies. If there are several hospitals in your town, you might not think medical supplies are very important, but if you have a good first aid kit and know how to use it, you can vastly improve the injured person's chance of survival while you wait for the ambulance to arrive. Natural disasters, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes, they happen all the time. Every year, thousands of people die in these sorts of disasters, and the rest of the world barely notices. Although it's possible doomsday will never arrive, the chance of natural disasters striking hundreds of towns this year is 100%. What if your town is next? but if you're a prepper, you'll be able to bug out in time or ride out the disaster until things return to normal. Power outage, when there's a natural disaster, the worst most people experience is a short power outage, but what if the power is out all day or all week? Well, would you be able to light your house, cook your food, or stay warm without power? Power outages are much more comfortable when you're a prepper. Stay in shape. This depends on the type of prepping you do. But if you work in the garden or go hunting on a regular basis or build things for your homestead, you'll be much healthier than you would be if you sat on the couch every evening. Peace of mind. This is one of the most important benefits of prepping. Whether doomsday arrives or not, at least you won't have to worry about it as much. There's an unfortunate stereotype that makes preppers look nervous or and stressed out. But actually, if you know you can handle almost anything life throws your way, you'll be much less stressed out than the average person. Improve self-esteem. Having the supplies you need and the skills to use them can not only bring you peace of mind, but make you proud of your efforts. One of the great things about prepping is you actually have something to show for it, and your self-esteem will be much higher if you feel confident rather than helpless at the prospect of disaster. 15. Bond with your friends and family. Prepping is something everyone can work together. It's not just about stocking up on food and supplies, it's about practicing survival skills, building things, and going on adventures such as hiking and camping. All these activities can bring you and your friends and family much closer together. I'm sure there are many other great reasons to prep. What did I forget? Again, that was from urbansurvivalsite.com. And that was titled 15 Reasons to Prep Even If Doomsday Never Arrives. And, you know, it's one of those things that I think that the state our economy is in, even if another bubble pops, but we don't completely collapse, each time it's making our economy even worse. And there's definitely a breaking point. And I honestly don't know if, you know, we could handle another one. Some people might disagree, might say, yeah, we'll get through another bubble popping, but it's, again, going to be pretty devastating to the United States, but it won't completely collapse the United States. I don't know. I really don't know. It's one of those things that it depends on how society reacts. And I think when you look at things like Ferguson, you know, Occupy, the left-right paradigm between Tea Party and Occupy, and Tea Party and Occupy, and the divide and conquer, I think with the tensions the way they are here in the United States, definitely between citizens and the government, another economic turmoil would be devastating. I personally believe it would be devastating. I think all the prepping that people have been doing for, not since Doomsday Preppers came out, but I'm talking about years before that, when prepping really started becoming, I want to say, a big thing around a lot of libertarian type people, anarcho type libertarians. I think a lot of people started seeing that. There's turmoil ahead, and it's not going to be nice. And then when you got all of this with Russia, all this with the Middle East, I think we're in a world war. I think we're in a world war that's not only these other, Middle East and Russia, Ukraine, all this. It's even with our own government. I think the American citizens are at a world war with governments around the world, including their own. And I just think that many people are still caught in this matrix type situation where they're not aware of what they're a part of. And I don't know where the future is going. I think anybody that believes 100% they know where the future is going is a little full of themselves. But I do know the direction we're headed is not going to be good for me or you, but it will benefit the world elite. I think there are a lot of strings being pulled purposely, and America is becoming irrelevant and kind of a nuisance to what we call the New World Order. And we need a free world order, not a new world order, a free world order. And, whether it be the extremist of the Middle East, the extremist of Europe, the extremist here in America, including the governments of all these places, they would either have to adhere to the non-aggression principle, or when you abridge someone's rights, you inherently give up yours by doing so. And we need to really convey that to the youth as knowledge for the future, because that's going to determine where our government heads and is allowed to head. So it's one of those things that we're going to continue to see these off ramps of the path we're on. And the only way we're stuck in the far lane of the off ramp. And the only way we're ever going to be able to get onto one of those off ramps from the path that we're on is if we can get enough cars to get over to allow us to also get over. So we need to get more people onto the concept of, hey, you're a free individual human being that has the ability to govern themselves and choose what and what not to put in their own body. And you have to deal with the consequences of what you do. Whether your health effects, well, you're going to have to pay for those health effects from putting bad things in your body because you chose to be lazy and not care what you're putting in your body. That's self-responsibility. You can't go, well, I went to McDonald's and got a triple cheeseburger every day, and why am I having heart problems? I should sue McDonald's, or I should demonize McDonald's. You make that choice. And we have to stop, throwing excuses. Definitely when there's information. Well, you go, well, dude, there's mixed information. Well, of course, the GMO people are going to tell you that their product is okay. You have to make the choice, and you go, well, I'm going to go ahead and believe that it's good for me. Well, okay. But you're making that choice, and if it turns out not to be good for you, you're going to have to, deal with that. And if proof comes out that it's causing a effect to, let's say, the organic farmers, to nature, the ability for other people to exercise their rights, and it starts abridging their rights, and you're intentionally hiding it to gain profit and it's exposed, you will have to deal with the consequences of that. This is what society needs, and I still have a belief that there is many people with humanity in them, whether they are awake to what's really going on or they are ignorant to it. I believe that most people are, people that have humanity in them. And when they become awake to that, us as individuals, operating as individuals, will create a very diverse and creative society, but understanding the need for each person to stand up for something they might disagree with, but know that it's that person's right, that society would be able to fight back any type of institution that would try to monopolize on force to control your way of life. Many people, you expect to see that in your lifetime? I don't. I'd like to. I don't expect to. But I hope to, that future generations will definitely grasp this concept to its fullest, and not just here in the U.S., but worldwide, and that we start breaking the chains and the bonds that keep us held down as a species, really. And I think when that happens, I think that the world, in a way, becomes reborn, because I think it would be more fluid. And the best example I can kind of explain that might be easy for people to understand when I say more fluid. When the world becomes more fluid, because our interactions with nature, and the natural order of things, and how fluid that is, it's the concept of liberty, freedom, and anarchy, libertarianism. When you understand that even limited government will always become big government, that the government is inherently wrong. When you look at it, it's like imagining intersections with traffic lights. How many times do you go to intersections, there's a wreck, or you almost get in a wreck because these damn lights, traffic gets backed up, people get mad, they start running red lights, causing wrecks, not paying attention because they've been sitting in this line too long. You have just all kinds of problems. Well, traffic lights are trying to help that stuff, but it doesn't seem to work. But then you can watch a video of places around the world that don't have traffic lights, have extremely heavy traffic, kind of like California, LA traffic, and it's fluid. Whole intersections, people coming from every direction, not stopping, not hitting each other, and not stopping. And it looks like water flowing in real time. Because if you understand the laws of nature, the natural law, you understand that humans best interact in free, volunteerist interactions. Everything that we can point out in history is not just the one madman. Oh, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great Conqueror, Napoleon, Hitler. It took all the people going along with the idea of control and government. Bad things happen because people are going along with the idea of government. And that's the nationalism, the patriotic thing. And, you know, I wouldn't ever look down on anybody for looking at history and going, you know, these things happened and, you know, it happened in this time. But I think that we've circled around enough times to go, okay, you know, things that great philosophers have been talking about and philosophers of new have refined and refined, that we really have a pretty good grasp on what freedom is, what it should be, what it's supposed to be. And it really gets back to, you know, our inherent rights as free individual human beings, and that no one's allowed to give another person rights over you. You wouldn't like if I go over to your neighbor that you dislike, that's always trying to cause problems with you, and go, you now, because I voted and I got some of my friends to vote, now you have authority over that neighbor that you hate. And you're that neighbor? Doesn't make a lot of sense. If that doesn't make a lot of sense, if that's not right, are you still defending government? Because in the democracy that we have, that's basically what you're doing. If you're ever championing government, that is what you're championing. And people are given this artificial fallacy of authority over others, whether it be the government itself or employees like law enforcement. And experience has proven, and experiments have proven, that when you give people this arbitrary authority over people, they will continue to grow more and more corrupt. Now, you will find your very few people that will stand on morals, but they won't usually last long on that side of the cage. And we've actually seen that happen, where a whistleblower of law enforcement was willing to blow the whistle, and they put him in a insane asylum. And his dad had to find him and get him out because he wanted to expose the corruption. And those people willing to do that are those same type of people that in experiments showed, when given that power over others, they will take it to the extreme and do whatever they can to preserve it. That is the government, that is law enforcement, and that is this old, outdated ideology that a flawed person can successfully rule over other flawed people. Trading one flaw for another does not improve society. It just shifts society. And we continue to have that shift from wrong on left, wrong on right, but never towards what is right. And that's the right for you to choose your life. So remember, you're a free, independent individual. human being. You have the right to your body. You have the right to choose your lifestyle. And you have the right to live free. Thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned here on UCY.tv for all the great broadcasts coming up next.